On behalf of the Indiana Parks Alliance, welcome to a conversation with Dan Bortner, Director of the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. This should be a very enlightening discussion, and we're delighted to have you with us. We'll continue to admit people as they show up, but meanwhile, let's get started. I'm Dan Hinkle, a volunteer with the Indiana Parks Alliance. IPA is a charitable organization that supports Indiana state parks and state-owned nature preserves, the resources they steward, and the people they serve. You might be familiar with IPA's grant program that helps Friends of the Parks groups by funding projects that enhance visitors' experience at DNR properties. We also advocate as part of the Indiana Conservation Alliance, and we're proud of the success of IPA's Save Our Ash Trees program. So please check out our website and Facebook page. Oh, and please say hi if you ever see us at an Earth Day celebration or another event. We've built in a little time toward the end of the program for Director Bortner to address your questions. Please use the chat function and let us know what you'd like to know about Indiana state parks and state-owned nature reserves. That's IPA's focus. And as time is limited, we'll have to keep our discussion centered on those topics, state parks and nature reserves. Please just submit your questions as they occur to you through the chat, and we'll cover as many as time allows. Please make sure your questions or chat comments are respectful and appropriate. All right, let's get started. We're delighted to have a full hour of undivided attention from a guy who's much in demand. That's Dan Bortner, Director of the Indiana Department of Natural Resources since 2020. Before that, he served for 15 years as Indiana State Parks Director. During Dan's tenure, Indiana State Parks celebrated its centennial in 2016, completed a goal to establish a dedicated nature preserve in each state park, placed an increased emphasis on natural resources management and restoration, improved numerous facilities and services across the system, and managed sites through the COVID-19 crisis and kept them open for all Hoosiers to enjoy. Talking with Dan will be Tom Hohman, President of the Indiana Parks Alliance. Tom retired in 2012 from the Indiana DNR, where he worked for 38 years, the last 16 years as Director of the Division of Engineering. Tom is also past President of the Association of Conservation Engineers and of the Indiana Native Plant Society. All right, Tom and Dan, let's get to it.
Well, thanks, Dan Hinkle. I'm here with Dan Bortner at Canyon Inn in McCormick Creek State Park, which, as some of you may know, is our first Indiana State Park. So I want to start out by talking, first of all, thank people at Canyon Inn for making this available to us here, some space and everything they've done to help us here today. And Dan, thanks for joining us. And can you tell us a little bit about the history of where we are, McCormick Creek and Canyon Inn?
Tom, and thank you to the Indiana Parks Alliance for putting this together this evening. It's a good opportunity for us to chat a little bit and talk about some of the things that are going on. So certainly happy to be here and be a part of that. And do appreciate you and your membership, not only for this evening, but for everything that you folks do to advocate for the state parks and for the nature preserves here in the state of Indiana. McCormick Creek State Park is a very special place in the history of Indiana state parks. I mean, the Indiana State Park system was a birthday present to the citizens of the state of Indiana in 1916 for their 100th birthday. And so that's, as you mentioned, McCormick Creek was the first state park dedicated July 4th of 1916. Don't have a whole lot of time to go into the story behind why it was first and not Turkey Run and all that.
Yeah, that's a long story.
Long story, but anyway, it is what it is. McCormick Creek was the first one, and this property is special. I mean, you can drive around this property, and it has everything. It's got hiking and biking and horseback riding and trails and bird watching, all those wonderful things. Beautiful creeks, beautiful canyons. But the CCC history here, it stands out so special. The things that were done by this group of young men at that time.
And for those that don't know, CCC is Civilian Conservation
Corps, a Jobs Corps program under the Roosevelt administration back in the day, which built a lot of the nation's special places. But here it's just very, very evident. this area of Indiana was noticed a long time ago. I mean, Dr. Dinkelwalter actually started things here. This matter of fact, this building that we're in started out as a health sanitarium, I believe in 1888. And so people noticed early on the special unique features here. And so it's and it stands today as a testament to the work that was done at that time. It's just a beautiful, wonderful place.
Okay, good. So since that time, obviously state parks, you've added a number. How many parks do you have now total?
Well, I tell you what, I think we are at 37 now. We were at that 32 when I left the Parks Agency or the Parks Department. And we've done some shuffling. It's we haven't added to the total DNR acreage and things from a standpoint of that movement, but we moved some things from other divisions into state parks. So I believe we're at 37 now.
Okay, so a lot of things have changed in 100 plus years. What's the biggest changes you think during that time, as far as the not just the facilities, but the users and how they use facilities? How's it changed?
It has changed, and it started out. I mean, we were the Department of Conservation, at that point, and didn't become the Department of Natural Resources until the middle '60s. So those early formative years, it was all about conservation. That you had state forest and all that predated that, but the conservation was the big piece. Today we focus, conservation obviously is still the mission. That's what we're after at the end of the day, but we use recreation to pay for conservation. That's how this works. And by allowing folks to come into these, they're again arguably the most special places in the state of Indiana, and to enjoy themselves and getting outside and things. That's been the biggest change, is just this high demand for recreation, which from our standpoint, of course, creates a pretty unique dichotomy. We're in charge of making sure that these special places are taken care of, and we still have to make sure that they are available for Hoosiers to get outside and enjoy and utilize. And that's where the agency as a whole wraps themselves around it. So, I mean, as a retiree from Department of Natural Resources and Engineering, that group is part of that. How do you take a special place and make sure folks can utilize it and see it and still protect it?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of work that goes into that. We didn't have a Department of Engineering and all these administrative things that went along with that early on that we do now.
Well, it may not have had a vision, but I have seen photos of the director of engineering back when they were first looking at Spring Mill Village.
Yes.
Colonel Lieber there, and right by his side was an engineer.
Yeah, and thank goodness,
to.
because there again, how do you set this up? The vision that those early pioneers in this business had, and Spring Mill's a perfect example. How do you set it up to where people can enjoy it, but still preserve what makes it so special?
Right.
And so that's probably what has changed the most. I mean, we measure everything. We know what our guests are looking for. We know the trails is the number one recreational opportunity on the properties and things. And so how do you take that information and spread that over to, say, nature preserves, which is so conservation focused? How do you, that balance is the trick. And we got good people and then folks that follow science to be able to make that happen.
So what is your role as director of engineering? How do you fit into this?
You're a DNR director. No, I don't know anything about engineering.
No. Yeah, DNR director. Yes. Did I say engineering?
You said engineering. Don't give me that.
What is your role as director of Department of Natural Resources?
The way I look at it.
Before you get too much into that, guys, let me interrupt for just a moment. We've had a number of people join us since we just started. Folks, this is our first question, or second question that Tom has asked Dan Bortner here. We'll have some time for Q&A afterward, so please put your questions about Indiana State Parks and nature preserves in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the conversation. But now let's hear again from Dan Bortner.
Okay, great.
Certainly. A young girl asked Walt Disney one time later in his career, once he explained to her that he no longer draws Mickey Mouse and he was no longer the voice of Mickey Mouse. And she asked him, well, what really do you do? And, his response was, well, I'm like a bee. I go from this area to this area, getting the ideas together. I guess I see my role as that I'm not a scientist. I don't have that type of background education and things, but what I can do is I can create an atmosphere where the people who do have those skills can be successful. My job, my role is to take take the agency where we need to go and want to go by providing the method, the manpower and the material to the people who know what they're doing to be able to move us forward. How do you take that idea of conservation, and there again, not being a scientific person, but I do know how to be able to get things done, to create an atmosphere where we can be successful. And that's my role, is just making sure that the agency as a whole, each division has the opportunity to succeed. And you and I have talked about this before personally, is that, the Landholding Bureau within DNR, there are 4 divisions within that. You got state parks, state forests, fish and wildlife, and nature preserves, each one having a different mission. But to the average person, when they show up to a property, if there's a black sign with yellow letters, it's park. But you and I know that each one of those divisions has a different mission. You can hunt in this one, you can't hunt in this one. We actively manage timber in this one. We don't actively manage timber in this one. It's totally focused on conservation and a nature preserve versus a fish and wildlife area. So each one has a little bit of a different mission. All are conservation minded, all are recreation minded. But it's a matter of taking that balance and making sure that we're able to do what we need to do.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about some concrete things in DNR, because Governor Hohman has a proposed budget for the next biennium that, in all honesty, I'm very excited about. There's some great things in there. Let's just start talking about what's in Governor Hochman's proposed budget.
Fans of the DNR should be very happy with the proposed budget that the governor put in. There are some big items in there. The one thing that jumps out immediately is there are 4 large, we're calling them the big 4 capital projects that the state as a whole that the governor has proposed. One of those big 4 projects is a new lodge at Potato Creek State Park. We've had a vision to put a lodge there since the early part of the 2000s. If you look at the map, we have 7 lodges. We have nothing in the northwest quadrant of the state. We had a lodge at Indiana Dunes up until the early 70s when it was taken out. So we have nothing in that quadrant now. And so being able to move into this market, into the Potato Creek area there at Potato Creek State Park, we think that there's a demand for it. We think there's an opportunity for it. It's going to be, as you and I were talking earlier, we went around all 7 of our lodges to try to figure out, if we built this today, what would we do different? Where we had that advantage of knowing what we know now. We know we need 100 rooms. We know that indoor aquatic features are very popular. We know what it's got to look like from a standpoint of being a Midwestern conservation style lodge. So a lot of those things that go into it. We are very, very excited about that possibility. The plans are a 120 room lodge, to meet the demand, a very large ballroom for events and things. So, but we'll just have to see. The main thing now is to see what gets funded in the budget. We're in the planning stages of it now. Like I said, we haven't made anything concrete yet because we don't know what that's going to look like. But fingers crossed that things will move there.
So any idea if funds do get approved for that?
Sure.
What the timetable might be?
We will be in a hurry. Because there again, once you got the approval to do it and you've got the money set aside to do it, things won't get cheaper. The longer you wait, the more expensive they will get. So we will want to get started on it. The idea is to have the plans drawn up now. We have a plan, but it's really large, and so we'll just have to see what that funding looks like. But there again, if you drag your feet on it, it won't get cheaper to get things done. So we'll want to move on it pretty quickly. If we can.
So what else is in the budget?
Well, there's a lot of money there for the Next Level Trails program. This program, the Next Level Trails program that the governor put in so far, has put $150 million into connective trails, connecting one community to another. The proposal is to put another $50 million towards that. The demand is still there. We're still putting out grants. We've been through 3 phases of grants to try to do what we can do with this. And obviously it's a matching grant program, but we've already got 50 miles completed that wasn't there before. And there's, I think, 190 miles left in the planning stages, either that's actively under construction or being planned. And so to be able to come in and add additional funding to that would be huge. There's so many places where we would like to connect parks to local communities. We're trying now to get out of the water and sewer business because, those these properties are small cities on the weekends. We run our own wastewater treatment facilities and things of this nature. And if we can get out of that business and connect with local utilities, then it certainly gives them additional customer revenue. It gets us out of the expense of doing that, but it also creates a perfect place to put a trail going from that property to that community. So there's always options there, you know, to be able to connect these things. The idea is connecting from one to the other. So, so next level trails is huge. There's let's see what else have we got. Go ahead.
So that is it the Monon Trail?
The Monon
is that
Trail.
part of the next level trails? Or
It
is that
is.
a separate item?
It is. We took almost $30 million of next level trails funding for that. This is the CSX line that ran from the river down near New Albany up to the White River in Lawrence County. So this project, we closed on it last Friday. So that the deal is done now. And this will go through 5 separate counties.
So the property is already, it was already set aside in some way.
Right, it was rail banked.
Rail banked,
Right,
okay.
yeah, it was rail banked and available. So the state of Indiana purchased that.
Okay.
We will have obviously a conservation easement on it. We don't plan to own it. Everything within Floyd County, the city of New Albany will run. Everything outside of Floyd County will be ran by a group called Radius Indiana.
Okay.
And so, you know, like I said, this thing crosses 5 counties, a dozen communities. There are almost 500,000 people that live within 12 miles of this corridor, this 62-mile contiguous corridor, which will obviously be the longest contiguous trail in the state of Indiana once it's completed. But, you know, being able, when you look at the map of all these different connector trails that are around, and you see that for 62 miles going through areas of the state.
Pretty scenic areas too.
Beautiful areas, and it's going to be an economic driver through some communities that could use that kind of tourism dollars and things like that. So we are very excited. The governor got behind this early on and got us the funding to be able to do it. So we're excited about it. Good stuff.
Okay, so what else is in there? There's some
the conservation. If you
talk about that.
Yeah, the governor put $25 million at the end of last year into what we referred to as the Next Level Conservation Trust, being able to put land into the public domain. That money, there was such a high demand for this that it was gone in 2 rounds, 60 days, and it was gone. So because of that, the governor has put in an additional $25 million. This time around, though, the idea would be to put it into the President Benjamin Harrison Trust in $12.5 million a year for 2 years to be able to get partners and things to go along with that. So there again, another heavy investment into conservation in the state of Indiana.
And talk about who all is able to use that
really yes, absolutely.
It's not all state.
It is not all state. Matter of fact, in situations like this, yes, there are some state, but we want to leverage those dollars. We want to bring in groups. We want to bring in the land trusts and the folks that are able to help us along those lines. Because there again, we're not nearly as concerned about who owns that property. We just want it conserved. We want to make sure that the landscape is what the landscape is intended to be. So,
do you know if that could be used for conservation easements too, or is it just fine?
At this point, I'm not sure.
Okay.
My guess is that it's both, but we're kind of still in the learning stage of exactly what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
And of course, the salaries and things that were just changed, which has been tremendous in helping us to get additional applicants and things. But there is a proposal in there in the governor's budget to increase starting pay for state police officers to $70,000 a year. That will include our conservation officers. Right. So that'll be very helpful trying to attract and retain the most highly educated, motivated people that we can get our hands on.
How does the number of conservation officers now compare to what it has been?
We're just like everybody else within the agency. The state of Indiana and DNR hired a bunch of folks in the early 70s who were all starting to retire. And yes, you know a few of those people. Yes,
I am one of those people, not conservation officers.
Absolutely. But the same thing was happening to our conservation officers. Right. We were losing a lot to retirement. And so we had 2 classes last year. So we brought on 40 new officers in 2022, Good. A lot of new faces in green walking around. And so we want to be able to continue to be able to attract that quality candidate being able to come out. The last 2 classes we put together, I couldn't have been happier with the number of folks that we had that were interested in and came to it with the real passion for the outdoors that we're looking for.
Okay, in terms of dollar amount, a little bit smaller dollar amount, but I think it's $3 million for the Interpretive Center at Provincetown.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, Provincetown, as you well know, is a very unique property.
Indeed it is.
How is that going to be different from what you might see at your normal nature center at Brown County or some other property?
And thank you for asking that. Prophetstown is obviously each property is unique in and of itself, but Prophetstown the history there is different, as is the landscape. The first thing we hear from people when they get there is, where are all the trees? And what we've done, obviously this was agricultural land when the state acquired it, a lot of it was. And we've taken this back to this natural prairie that it was supposed to be. The eastern border of the great Midwestern prairies was up through this area. So we've gone back through and tried to recreate that. So you've got that part of it. But the Native American story there is huge. The great migration west of the Native American people, that all started there. That all happened there. There are so many tribes that have a connection to that land. Something that we've been trying to do over the last really 15 years or so is to make a connection with those tribes, to get their input on what's going on. Now, and don't get me wrong, we still make the decisions, as far as what's going to happen and stuff, but bringing them to the conversation has been what we want to do. We put in an area there that we refer to as the Circle of Stones a few years back. And each one of the tribes that was represented there now has a stone with a plaque on it with the name of that tribe, to where that connection is there. And so, we talked about not having any lodges or anything in that northwest quadrant. Someday we'd like to have one there at Prophetstown too, so we'd have a second one there. But it's a lot, as you said, it's a lot cheaper, a lot less expensive to go into this interpretive center, which we need to do desperately, because all of our interpretive centers on properties, they're there to tell a story. This one will be telling, obviously, the natural resources story, but also the cultural resources story, which is different than what we have in other areas. So we are taking their ideas and their culture and trying to weave that into what we're doing there. And the staff at State Parks has done a wonderful job of creating relationships with the federally recognized tribes. So we're excited about it. We love the input. And I can't wait to see what that's going to look like when we get something together.
I'm excited about
It'll
that
be
too.
unique.
Yeah, and I do remember first time I was up there, obviously in the development stage of the park, but just seeing open space, which was so unique in a state park. But yeah, it's a really cool park.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about money now.
It always comes back to the money. That's
well,
true.
yeah. So as a lot of our viewers probably know, but not everybody probably knows, when they pay a gate fee, that goes into a state park, and other fees in the park, that goes into a dedicated fund.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah,
where that stands. And
you have the general fund, which is money that's appropriated by the General Assembly. And as you said,
sales tax and income tax.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's where that comes from. And then the dedicated fund, which is money raised on the properties. And just looking at some of those numbers, like for fiscal year 22 and 23, the total appropriation combined was $38.8 million. Of that, $3.5 million, about a little over 9% was general fund money. The remainder, the 35%, the $35 million was almost 91%. That's dedicated fund money. And 15 years ago, when I first got here, we were about 60%, 62% self-funded, and now we're up to 90%. If you look at what we've put into budget for next year, those numbers are higher. The appropriation is $47.1 million. The general fund remains the same. We're not asking for additional money from the legislature. It's going to stay at $3.5 million. But the remainder, the $43.5 million, which is almost 93%, is dedicated fund money. We've been able to be good stewards of the money that we raise. And obviously a lot of the help from that financially, the pandemic, people got outside, and we knew that they would. Like I said, we measure everything, and we know that when Hoosiers come to these properties, they like to hike. And I went to the governor. I was the president of the National Association of State Park Directors at that time. And we were watching the systems around us close one by one. Michigan closed, Kentucky closed, Ohio, and then Illinois. And I told the governor's office, look, the idea here is to eliminate contact, human contact. We can do that. We closed the offices, we closed the bathrooms. Now, when we closed the bathrooms and brought in porta potties, you can imagine the questions I got. But once we
Yes.
explained to people that our staff doesn't have to clean those, that made more sense. But we
Mhm.
never closed the properties. People could still come out and hike. And one thing we've always learned, that if you can get people outside, they'll come back.
Mhm.
It's just a matter of
Yeah.
getting them out for the
Yeah.
first time.
Right.
And that's what we've seen here. I mean, we've seen a leveling off now of visitation, but it's leveling off at a very high level. And that's been everywhere around the country. I mean, national parks, local parks, any place where there's green spaces seem to benefit from that. When people are looking for normalcy, they
Yeah.
go outside.
Yeah.
We saw the same phenomenon in 9/11. So that, if there's a bright shining spark that came out of the pandemic, it's the fact that people rediscovered the outdoors.
So what about your campground usage? I'm sure that's up too.
It is, everything is.
How
It's crazy.
Do you have enough capacity? Are you where do you stand on campgrounds? Do you need more campgrounds or larger or what?
We certainly could put more in, but once again, you got to find the balance.
Right. You don't want to
Yeah.
overcrowd.
Right. And, some of the things that we're looking at, across our system, there was a time where rally camps for scouts
Uh-huh.
were huge. Group camps for 4-H and scouts and things, and church groups and things was very huge. So even though that demand, because those entities have their own camps now, has fallen off, we still have that space. So we're trying to kind of evaluate what is the best use of the space that we have that's available for overnight stays. At Spring Mill, for instance, there was an entire loop of primitive camping. The entire campground is only 160 sites. When you
Mhm.
walk through that primitive area on a Friday night, it would be all campers up there running generators. If they
Really?
if they had the
Mhm.
ability, they would have been any other campground.
Mhm.
So we are taking that entire loop and making
Nothing
it-
like primitive camping right next to a generator.
yeah, yeah. So as that demand for primitive camping has subsided, we're looking at, changing kind of what is there.
Okay.
The campsites remain, but it would be an upgraded site. Now, don't get me wrong, we still have to have some, I'm a tent camper too.
Yes. Yes.
So you still got to
yeah.
have that. But those rally camps and things that were open space before,
Yeah.
those can be converted to primitive camping and
Okay.
things like that.
So keep your overall footprint the same,
Right.
but modify that usage.
Just figure
a
out
little
the
bit.
best way
Yeah.
to use it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
makes sense, makes sense. So on this, the dedicated fund, then, you obviously that use is, and campground fees as well as other things go into that fund.
Right.
So how sustainable is that? Do you think that 93%, I think you said you're up to now, is that sustainable long-term or?
Yes and no. Yes, it is from a standpoint of, I think that folks will continue to visit us. But that having been said too, if you look at the changing patterns and the demographics in the state of Indiana among the population, we've got to make some inroads into some of the minority communities and things like this that historically haven't been that traditional customer. We've got a lot of work to do along those lines. As the demographics change with the population, we've got to be a part of that as well to make sure that, because there again, if people were to quit coming, we just said we're 93% self-funded right now. That can be a problem.
Right.
People love who we are and what we do. We've got to make sure that we maintain that.
Mhm. So looking then, I heard Terry Coleman, State Parks Director, make a comment a couple days ago that it's ironic that for so many years we didn't have the money to do things, and now we have money and we don't have people.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about some of the problems you've had, and DNR is not unique.
Oh,
in
no,
that.
no.
Private businesses have had that
Right.
problem too.
Right. Yeah, everybody is competing from the same labor pool.
Mhm.
And if you're not in the game in terms of compensation and benefits, it just makes it very, very difficult. And for the last few years, when the private sector reacted to that scarcity, and we were not able to do that, it was very difficult. If we were close, then you could get people to come to work, especially the folks that come and work for us during the summer months and things, the students,
Mhm.
But if they can go across town and make $13, $14 an hour, but we're making $9 with us, that made it very, very difficult to compete. This last compensation study, where the governor put together a study to see about compensation as a whole in the state of Indiana, that went through and went into effect in October. We have already seen, and granted, we haven't got to the seasonal part yet, so our fingers are crossed on that. But as far as full-time, people coming to work for us on a full-time basis, the number of applicants that we have seen come forward has increased tremendously. And that's been a blessing. We've been able to fill some spots that we just were not able to fill before.
Yeah.
So fingers
You
crossed for
you
the
mentioned
season.
the seasonal employees. A lot of people probably don't realize how many seasonal employees you have. Don't expect you to remember the exact numbers, but approximately how many full-time employees do you have and how many seasonal?
The agency as a whole will go from about 1,200 employees to about 3,500 employees. So, it's crossed every division. If you're in entomology, we're counting spongy moth. I mean, it's just, there's so many folks that we bring in to work during what we consider that quote unquote recreation season. And so, yeah, I mean, we're in an active process right now of hiring. If you know anybody looking for summer help, summer work, come see us.
There you go. We have people in the audience out there if you know anybody looking for a job. So,
and that's the best way to get your foot in the door.
right.
I always, Terry Coleman, the person who is running state parks now after I moved into this role, Terry is the poster child of man. Terry started his career with us cleaning bathrooms at Pokagon State Park. Now he runs the agency or the division. So anywhere, if you're employed by Indiana State Parks, there is hope that someday you can run the division of state parks. It's the best way to get your foot in the door to truly understand, the work that we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's obviously that helps him run things, knowing
Absolutely.
more about that throughout the areas there.
Absolutely.
So now I know even as recently as last summer, I know of at least one pool in one of the parks that was not open because they couldn't find lifeguards.
It was a challenge. Well, we had to close Indiana Dunes early.
Okay.
We weren't open Labor Day weekend at Indiana Dunes with from a standpoint of
Right.
the beach, the lifeguards, because the lifeguards are going back to school.
Mhm.
And so it was a real challenge. We're hoping that that's going to be better this year as we look at things. But there again, if you've got the same groups, you got municipal groups, everybody that has a pool is looking for the same lifeguards.
Right.
And we've got to be able to compete with that. So, to your point, there were some pools last year around the system that were only open on weekends.
Mhm.
Or if one person called in sick, we couldn't open. And it was literally that tight in some areas. Hopefully it'll be better this year.
So where do you stand as far as the full-time employees? Are you seeing some with these salary increases?
Yes, we have done amazing. The world is a much smaller place than when you and I went into the labor force. The young folks coming out of schools today, college today, they can move out west, they can move out east. It's it's not as big a deal to them as was once with us. So because everybody is looking for biologists and folks to help with what the work that we do, we have to be able to compete. And so, like I said, so far with this new compensation, it has been a big help. Folks have really responded to that.
So if any of our anybody watching this knows someone or themselves is interested in either full-time or part-time, how would they find out about the jobs?
Absolutely. What I would do, I always recommend them go to the state jobs, the state personnel website, www.in.gov, and go to state personnel, and there's a job bank. And every job that is available, and they all have to be posted, even if they've already got somebody in mind who they're going to hire, they still have to be posted to give everybody an opportunity to swing the bat at those positions. So get on there and look at those and apply for everything that interests you. Do it now.
Yeah, that's true.
Because we are hiring now for summer.
Right. You can't wait till the end of May.
Yeah, if you come to see us after
job.
Memorial Day, that makes it a challenge.
Unless they've got an opening that's just waiting for somebody.
Yeah.
But,
if you're a lifeguard, we could probably.
Yeah. Okay. So along the hiring standpoint, and you touched a little bit on earlier in terms of the visitation with the minority groups, and there's been complaints not just among or DNR, but among conservation groups in general about the lack of diversity among the people. So I know that you're trying to making some attempts to try to improve on that. What are you doing, and what do you see
when the governor opened up his office of inclusion and diversity, Kara Herring, who runs that office now, we were at her door when she got there. Come to help us to understand what we need to do. What we've done in the past was we would hit every hiring fair with every university and things, but when you really think through that, when people develop a love for the outdoors and want to do this for the rest of their life, it's not when they're 22. Mm-hmm. It's when they're 7. So we were waiting too long to try to attract minority populations to this line of work. And so what we're trying to do is trying to create opportunities for younger kids to come out and see what is there. we've reached out to some national groups. I know Terry Coleman is working with a group called Black Folks Camp 2, just trying to figure out exactly how to approach this cultural phenomenon, if you will. You know, I learned the outdoors because that's where my dad took me. Well, if your parents don't take you there, then we have to figure out how to partner with schools to be able to get that comfort level there, to create the opportunities. And then, you know, I think we're headed in the right direction, but we have a long way to go yet.
Now you have Fort Harrison State Park, obviously in Indianapolis,
Sure.
which would have the largest population of minority groups in the
Right.
state, obviously, because it's the largest population in
Right.
general.
Sure.
Is there any way that Fort Harrison Park can be, are they a part, how much of part of that effort to outreach are
You
they?
know, we had and you would remember this, Tom, the Hoosier Outdoor
Yeah,
Experience that we
right.
had up there. And after doing that for 5 or 6 years, some of the questions we would ask guests and people that were coming in that day, because this was targeted to bring in, you know, populations that weren't the traditional users of the park. And what we found out was that it was a great party for a day. You know, everybody had a great time doing all these outdoor activities and stuff, but it didn't translate to people being able to come out on their own and enjoy that. There's still a I guess, lack of a comfort level for a better. So we've got to, that's where we have figured what we have got to do is we've got to make sure that we're reaching these folks when they're younger. You know, they're again developing that confidence that the outdoors brings, and then being able to be out there without being concerned for safety and things like that. So like I said, we got a long way to go, but I think we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay, so
Dan, Tom, I'm sorry to interrupt. Great conversation. We have quite a few questions that we want to get to. So maybe one or two more of your topics, and then we'll see what folks have on their minds here.
let me throw one more general question out. Okay, I want to talk about nature reserves a little bit, and then I'll go to a final question, and then kick it back to the chat room questions. Nature preserves obviously is a little bit different than state parks in terms of the public usage. Really the prime purpose of nature preserves is protection, conservation. But there's a lot of great opportunities for hiking there and everything, and it's what a lot of people, myself included, really enjoy.
Right.
What's the challenges in trying to increase those opportunities for people to use the nature preserves without messing them up?
Yeah, and that's there again. It's finding that balance is very, very tricky. You know, there's ways that we can control, you know, the amount of visitation, size of parking lot. You know,
True.
Now obviously making sure that folks can't park where they're not supposed to. But we saw that there again. That was the first thing I noticed during this pandemic is that folks started going. I mean, and you would drive by a parking lot that before you'd see one or two cars in, and it would be full. So we are doing some reconnaissance, if you will, in those areas now, just making sure that trails are well marked and making sure that folks are where we want them to be and stuff like that. So I think that we can certainly do it, but yeah, we've got to be very, very cautious that we're keeping people where they need to be, you know, and education is a big part of that. Making sure that they understand what that nature preserve, how it is different than a park, things like that.
And that you don't throw your trash around and that kind of stuff. So
take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints.
Some of the newer users, I heard some initial problems. Has that improved some?
We think it has. You know, before, like I said, when folks would come and visit the properties, our staff wouldn't make the contact because of the health concerns.
Right.
Now we do.
Okay.
So now, you know, our staff will be out there and they'll be talking to people, and we have seen it improve drastically. And I think it was just a lack of education.
Okay. So the last question that I have for you then comes out to the basic interaction of the Indiana Parks Alliance with state parks and DNR. Obviously, our mission is to support and advocate for, and yes, we certainly do the advocating part, but how can, in your mind, how can IPA best help DNR?
You know, the thing that you guys bring to the table for us is obviously the passion for the work, as you said. I mean, you guys you're in the State House more than I am. You guys are bringing folks together to have these conversations, and that's huge. But just keep loving us. You know, making sure that your membership understands what our missions are. There again, because we're talking specifically about state parks and state nature preserves. Those missions are clearly defined, help people to understand that and how these two particular divisions differ than the other divisions, and making sure that they're, again, people understand that these belong to them, but they know how to use them in a responsible manner. The education process that you guys bring to this is big, and educating legislators has been of tremendous value for us. And you guys haven't been at it that long, but I can already see a difference in the conversations that are being held. So we appreciate that. Keep doing what you're doing.
Great. Well, Dan, let's get to some of these questions
Absolutely.
from the chat room there. I'm looking forward to see what those are.
Got a pen here.
All right, good, thanks. Fascinating conversation here. Ellen says, I'm a troop leader who's always looking for a way to help our community. That being said, are there any conservation projects boys and girls in Scouting USA can do to help our state parks or nature preserves?
And absolutely there are. I would hate to have to count the number of Eagle Scout projects that have been done on state parks properties. Any group that has that desire to be a part of what we're doing, I encourage you to reach out to that local property that is closest to you. I promise you're not going to get turned away. There are programs that are property specific that you can come out and be a part of. Even a family just on a Saturday afternoon, if you want to volunteer time. There's so much that needs to get done. And there are so many wonderful Hoosiers that step up to help us with that. And you can be a part of that. I mean, hundreds of thousands of volunteer hours every year that without those, we would be in a world of hurt. So always be willing to step in and do that and reach out to those local properties. And I promise you, they'll be happy that you did.
I want to put a plug in here for the local friends groups. Probably about 2/3 or more, that's growing a little bit more each year, of the state parks have friends groups that their mission is to help just that state park. And they're the main ones that do a lot of the volunteer labor and stuff for special projects on the parks. They also do some fundraising for projects. But if you're looking to get involved in doing volunteer labor, if you don't know how to contact the friends group, check with the park office. They'll put you in touch with them. But for individuals or groups, whatever, it's a great way to get involved in those local parks and provide some very valuable services to them.
All right, thanks. Next question concerns one of the many things that people love to do in the parks. Mock asks, what do you think the future is for mountain biking in Indiana state parks?
What the future is for mountain biking?
Right.
Okay. Mountain bikes have come on the scene in a huge way. You look just in the last 15 years or so, the amount of trail that has been built. The entities out there that partner with us are some of the best partners we have across the properties. They build sustainable trail. They do a great job of maintaining those trails and taking care of those. There again, without their assistance, we wouldn't be able to do that. But Brown County is now considered an epic destination when it comes to mountain biking, and if you're into that particular sport, that has meaning to you. But across the board, I mean, whether it's in southern Indiana or up closer to Indianapolis, I mean, so many properties have now taken on the mountain biking trails. And with everything that we do, there has to be a plan. We don't want to saturate the properties with so much recreation. That was part of the impetus by getting a nature preserve on every property, just to make sure some things protected. But the idea that mountain bikes are here, they're here to stay. And, they are great partners, and we look forward to continued work with them.
All right, thanks. Next question comes from Amy. What do you suggest an interested conservationists do when they learn that a major facility will be constructed on property adjacent to a dedicated nature preserve? Can DNR provide any help with helping the owner be nature preserve friendly?
Yeah, that creates an interesting dichotomy when you're talking about private land next to public land. Obviously, the public land can only control the public land. They can't control what is there. That's why it's important when you have sensitive areas. I mean, what comes to mind is the Sentinel Landscape Program that was the federal government made Indiana a part of, trying to acquire land that came available around military bases there again to create that buffer. And you have to do the same thing with these nature preserves. That's why it's important to make sure that Harrison Trust and various other conservation funding programs are in existence to be able to acquire the buffer around these sensitive spots. That's really the about all you can do. You hope that you have a good corporate neighbor as these places were to locate around there, but you can only do what you can do. So there again, creating the buffer where we can is the best opportunity that we have.
Great, thank you. Here's a follow-up from Amy. Asking about the landscape program. Not sure.
What landscape program did you say? You said something about a landscape program?
Oh, the Sentinel Landscape. This is the Sentinel Landscape is a federal program. It's I think that Indiana might be the only one on this side of the Mississippi River, but when you have military installations such as Crane. Or what used to be Fort Harrison and some of these areas, Atterbury, that have, national security implications, to be able to create a buffer around that, a natural buffer. And if you look at the aerial maps, I mean, Crane's 100 square miles of dark space, to be able to acquire some of the land around that to create that buffer. So it's, like I said, it's the same thing with these nature preserves. If land becomes available around that, you have to weigh, the advantage to be able to acquire some of that land. But if it's private, there's just not a whole lot that you can do short of acquiring it from them.
All right, thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Here's a question from Tom. Jasper Pulaski Fish and Wildlife Area is used by thousands of hunters, fishermen, bird watchers, and outdoor enthusiasts each year. Division of Nature Preserves co-manages 2 state nature preserves, as well as having a regional ecologist sharing office space at JP. Facilities for staff and visitors are outdated. When will a new office visitor center complex be built to support the staff and visitors to this property?
I actually got cornered by a legislator on that very topic last week. I'm not familiar with what we have up there with regards to infrastructure. But I need to take a look at that, because there again, to the point that the question makes, I mean, JP is huge from a visitation standpoint, right, when things are hopping up there.
Sandhill cranes.
Exactly. And if we're going to truly take that and make it available for people to see, if we don't have the proper infrastructure that is properly maintained, that's when you have the problems. That's when you have the chaos, people parking where they shouldn't, being where they shouldn't. In order to make that work, we have to have a sustainable plan of what that looks like and where we want people to go. And you have to have the facilities there. I mean, that's there again, we talked about the difference between the land holding divisions. If you're talking about, if you're talking about parks, that means infrastructure that has to be maintained. The time to decide whether or not you're going to maintain a structure or a building is before you build it. Once you've built it, you have a responsibility to take care of it. So we'll take a good look at that. The governor gave us $100 million in the last budget to work on deferred maintenance, and we had a bunch of it. That first allotment, a lot of that went into things that the public doesn't see. It went into water and sewer lines and things like that. But we're hoping that additional funding comes our way to be able to jump onto some of these things that need it. We've been around for 100 years. The buildings need a lot of love. They need a lot of work. A lot of the structures do.
So Dan, following up on the Jasper Pulaski thing, why don't you talk a little bit about the Goose Pond Fish and Wildlife Area, the facilities down there? Because I know a lot of people have not discovered that.
Yeah, if you're interested in birds, go check out Goose Pond. I was there last week. We have 30,000 snow geese out there. It's amazing. The governor made the trip down with us. We wanted to get him to JP in November, but he wasn't feeling well, so we didn't get up there. And I said, come down to Goose Pond and let's take a look down there. So anyway, that place is amazing. We tried for 50 years to get the property at Goose Pond. And in 2005, we're finally able to acquire that. It has taken us about 15 years to convert it from what it was, mostly ag land, to getting it back to what Mother Nature intended it to be. But as a result of that, we are now seeing species of birds down there that we haven't seen in Indiana over 100 years. We're literally changing the flyways of some of the species as they go through. It's an amazing place. Google it, come down and see us.
If you build it, they will come.
They did.
That's amazing. Hey, well, listen, guys, we have a little extra time. We've got about 10 more minutes. Dan, what have we not asked you? What else would you like to share about what's in store for state
I've
parks?
got one more question on my list that I didn't get to, Dan. So, and it's something that quite frankly, I don't know much about myself. I had not heard about it until someone suggested this question. The Origin Park project,
Yes.
down at near on the Ohio River, is about all I know. I did Google a little bit just to find out a little bit about it, but can you talk about that?
I
what
sure
it is?
can. I sure can. It's a visionary and really pretty ambitious project along the Ohio River between Clarksville and New Albany. It will provide thousands of visitors with trails and facilities and just a whole different array of activities that are going to happen down there. The River Heritage Conservancy is the driving force behind this. They're the sponsoring organization of Origin Park. They're the ones that are doing the planning and the design, the fundraising that's going to convert, in essence, what is abandoned industrial area into 400 acres of urban parkland. And once that park gets built, it will connect. Falls of the Ohio will be our state park. There will be kind of the eastern boundary of this.
Okay.
It'll go into this area that I know well, that it just wasn't a place you wanted to be as you travel to the west of the park there.
Okay.
And so all that will become parkland and eventually working its way over to New Albany, which they're again hooking into eventually the Monon Trail. There's still some area between the southern terminus of the Monon and this that we'd like to try to connect together that we're working on, but it will create a huge opportunity for folks in that section of the state. And they're out doing the fundraising things. The state of Indiana will benefit from it there again because of the connection to the parks and what was the George Rogers Clark cabin site there that we're working on. All of that will be tied together as part of this story. So yeah, it's going to be a big deal.
So who would actually be the owner and operating that park?
We'll obviously stay within our wheelhouse as we always do. I don't know whether. I'm not familiar with whether it's going to be, partially county, partially, township governments, or exactly who's going to do that. But I know that there's a lot of hands in it right now, trying to determine what's going to happen with it.
So is there any state money in that in terms of?
I don't believe we have anything at this point.
Okay.
As these things go, I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't have some. One thing we did do, which we very rarely do, is we deeded some property over to this. The area there that is just to the west of the Clark cabin site. It's really kind of almost like a marshland type of thing there. They wanted to be able to utilize that as part of this. And, our position was that, well, as long as it stays in the public domain for recreational purposes, sure, why not?
So what's happened to the Clark cabin, which site, which for those that don't know, it burned.
Yes, it
I
did.
presume was it arson?
Yeah.
Okay. A couple of years ago? Or?
Yeah. It completely destroyed what was the replica of the Clark cabin. There has been a painstaking effort to really evaluate that site to determine the best way to tell the story there. And I know the folks in state parks have met with a ton of user groups and local community folks to try to get input on what that's going to look like. The initial thought was, well, we go out, we find a cabin, put a cabin back there, but we're really rethinking that. Is that the best way to tell the story of what that was? And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see a different use of that landscape. I haven't seen the plans yet that have come out of that information gathering, but I'm not going to be surprised if it doesn't involve a log cabin. That won't surprise me at all. If you look at the Falls of the Ohio Interpretive Center, when that was built versus what it is now after new exhibits and things were put in. Folks today, when they learn these stories, they want to be immersed in it. They don't want to just read about it. They want it to encompass the senses and things. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the plan is for that. But I think we're close because I think that they've got most of the planning part ideas at least assembled.
So a few years back when I was at a meeting for a Association of Conservation Engineers in St. Louis, and they were talking about St. Louis as being where the Lewis and Clark started their journey. And I said, no.
No.
Can you tell everybody what the significance of that site is?
Yeah, I can't remember if it was Meriwether Lewis or William
Yeah,
Clark
one or the other. I don't remember which one.
Put it in his diary that day when they left St. Louis, that here the journey begins, messed us up for a long time. Anyway, our position, and history proves us correct, is that the core of discovery started on the front porch of George Rogers Clark's cabin when Meriwether Lewis and William Clark met for the first time. If you look at the members who made up the Corps of Discovery, a large percentage of those individuals were Floyd's Knobs in the Louisville area and things like that. So, that significance of that cabin home site is there again. George Rogers Clark and the Revolutionary War history and the land grants and everything that made Clarksville. There's so much history right there. And the story of the Corps of Discovery really goes back even further. And we did congressional testimony and all kinds of things trying to get this connected back, and that we were successful. So now the Lewis and Clark Trail runs all the way back into, I believe, as far back as Virginia and Pennsylvania. So
okay.
We finally have got that piece done. It just took a while.
So we didn't start it. It started even farther east.
Yeah. The whole story. I mean, you have to look at the whole story,
Sure.
of Meriwether Lewis, his connection to Thomas Jefferson and William Clark, and his connection to there again, the coming through the Appalachians and things. So it's all obviously the history was made when they went to the West, but there's a lot of things that happened before that.
Mhm.
All right. Well, I think we have time for one more quick question. This is a follow-up to the mention of trails, and we're also excited to see trails going in around the state. Question about the Monon Trail from New Albany to the White River. Will it be for hiking and biking? And will the trestle across the White River be repaired so the trail gets into Bedford? What have you got on that?
Yeah, obviously the getting across the White River is a problem. The bigger problem is the trail itself, the rail from the terminus that was purchased by the state of Indiana is there again to the south of Yawkey Road there in Mitchell. That connector from Yawkey Road, and let's just say that you were going to go to the Milwaukee Trail at Bedford, that's 7 miles. The disposition of that, has it been rail banked? Is it available? So, I mean, there's other hurdles to cross before you even worry about getting across the river. It's whether or not it can be acquired. We got very, very lucky on this Monon piece that we've already acquired in that it was rail bank that made it available for purchase. We've got to look at these other things to see if anything can be worked out there. And also in the southern terminus of this, I mean, this goes into the city of New Albany, but I know Mayor Gahan would like to take that from the southern terminus on down to the river. So, there's connectors on both ends that we're still working on there.
All right. Thanks so much, Dan Bortner. Thank you for filling us in on the latest developments on Indiana DNR, and especially the parks and nature preserves that we enjoy so much. IPA appreciates your leadership, and we're happy to help when we can. And thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. We hope you found value in the discussion. We'll share a recording of this conversation as soon as the video is ready. So look for an email soon containing a link. And please also check the IPA Facebook page for announcements of other events. Meanwhile, stay safe, and we'll see you in the great Indiana outdoors.